Hello, welcome back to the Doctor Who Show's Hot Takes. I'm Dave.
I'm Rob.
And we have just watched The Devil's Chord. And Rob, before I ask you what the hell was that all about, I'm going to ask you for your word of the week.
Dave, my word of the week is groove.
Groove. Just making a note of that. My word of the week is fortissimo.
Oh, very nice.
So, Rob, we have just gone. I had some toast. Then we watched The Devil's Chord. So we just to be clear, we recorded our first hot take, having only seen part one. We're now watching one focused on part two. Rob, I said before, what the hell was that all about? But I will refine that question a little bit and say, what did you make of The Devil's Chord?
Well, I think you can see why they dropped 2 episodes at once this weekend. I think if they'd just dropped that first episode, and we'd thought this before it even went out, so this isn't even a new thought for us. I know, Dave, you'll be sitting there thinking, we've already talked about this, Rob, off mic. But I think you can see that this was a step up from the previous episode. I think if they'd just left everyone on Space Babies for a week, comment on Doctor Who online would have been maybe not negative, but maybe a bit, So by throwing this out there, which I think was a step up, I hear you saying already, Dave, what was that all about? I think that's something we're going to get into. But I think it was a better episode. It was light on story, I'll say that much. Funnily enough, for one that was longer than the first episode, this was lighter on story, and I think padded out with a few musical interludes, particularly Ruby's piece. We'll get to that. But broadly, I thought it was better. I have questions, though. I have, criticisms. But it was better, Dave. I'll start by saying that.
Okay.
You don't think it was?
I am still coming to terms with this episode. There were moments that I thought, that's really lovely. There were moments I thought, that's really good. There were other, perhaps more plentiful moments when I quietly looked around to make sure nobody else could see me watching this, because it was just so bad and embarrassing.
It's funny you should say that, because there was, I don't even know what the particular scene was, but there was a scene where I was sitting there thinking, my work bestie, who people who have heard the Beatles World Cup episodes will have heard me talk about many times, loves the Beatles. I wonder what she would make of this. And my honest to God thought was, she would hate this and she would say, what the hell is going on? I don't think she would get into this at all, even with the Beatles hook in there.
Yeah, I genuinely suspect that when the UK wakes up, we start to get all of those hot takes and views on social media, and it's kind of been fun to see it all before the UK and not have their hot takes all over Twitter when we're watching it. That's been kind of relaxing.
It's new, yeah.
It is new. It feels weirder than I thought it would. I'm just going to put that out there.
Yeah.
I suspect that when we start to see some takes on this, and particularly the sort of as the day goes on and more people just sort of who are not, I've got to watch it now, and when more people just sort of get to it, I think this could be a very divisive episode.
Yeah.
Not in a way like The Timeless Child, where there's a real intensity to it. I think there'll just be some people who go, I get this. This worked for me. This landed for me. This is the camp, silly fun that I want Doctor Who to be. And great. For those people, this is going to be a fantastic episode. And then there are going to be people who are probably in my box who just go, that just didn't land for me. I don't know what was going on. There were embarrassing moments. There was one bit where I've just gone, oh, for God's sake, I'm not watching a kid's show.
Yeah.
And they're going it's going to not really land. And the first group's going to hear those comments and go, Doctor Who is a kid's show, lighten up. And again, that's okay. If you're in that camp and this landed for you, fine. I think it will for a lot of people. All those people watching Eurovision this weekend will go, this is fantastic.
Yeah.
People like me who avoid Eurovision like the plague will go, this is why.
Look, I've got a whole page of notes in front of me, but one of the big words I've scribbled down there is cartoonish. Like scenes where the Doctor got sucked into was it a cello he got sucked into, and Ruby was being dragged around the corridors of Abbey Road by musical notes. It was extremely cartoonish. And again, there's a kind of person, kind of Doctor Who fan even, who would be like, oh, I love this cartoonish stuff. That's quite amazing. And in some ways, it's a callback to the Celestial Toymaker episode at the 60th, which had sort of cartoonish vibe to it. So I get it. And I believe that's even valid, Dave. I think that's a valid way to tell the story. But it's not going to sit well with, I won't say a lot of fans or a few fans, I'll say just some fans.
Yeah, I have no idea what the balance will be, but yes, I was definitely in the camp of this is just too cartoony for me.
Yep. So you think cartoony, yeah?
Yeah, I sort of went with sort of childish, but I think cartoony is a better word. Yeah, yes, I think that will land well for some, and that's great. It didn't land for me.
Okay. Before this episode went out, back on our monthly episode, I mentioned a few things that were already niggling at me, like the Abbey Road studio being set up wrong with, George Martin sitting across from the band instead of sitting upstairs in the control room. Also, Shooty being dressed for like the Summer of Love, 1967, not 1963, and indeed most of the extras dressed like 1967, with striped pants, bright colours, those big thick leather belts. These aren't things that made me dislike the episode by any means, but they're things I was picking up on as I was watching it. I thought it might have even been a plot point that they were going to try and go and see them record Sgt. Pepper in 1967, and so he's dressed for 1967, but they land in 1963, and we've made a mistake. And that was part of that look. But no, it seems the costume designer for this show thinks people dressed in 1963 like it was 1967. Anyway, maybe a small thing, maybe it's just something I'm worried about, but I picked up on that.
Well, obviously, when they went through the goodies quick change cabinet, it didn't have the settings quite right.
Speaking of the goodies, there was a moment where we're seeing the Doctor and Ruby interact with the Beatles, and the Beatles are actually on screen talking, and they look nothing like the Beatles. Everything's wrong about them, and it just wasn't working for me. And I thought it would be better if the Beatles weren't actually shown, like their faces, maybe just like hands and whatever, and just talking to each other. And it reminded me of, what have you got there, Ringo? Eleanor Rigby. Shall we give it a go? From that goodies episode where you don't see them saying those lines. So it's funny you mentioned the goodies, because that came into my head.
Yes, I had a couple of goodies moments come through here, particularly when they got to Cilla Black, I believe it was.
Yes.
And the only thing I know about Cilla Black is she sung that high note in that episode of the goodies, so okay, that was a good reference. But I know what you mean about the Beatles, so let's have that conversation, because I was a little bit willing to defend the photos of the Beatles, and I did so in our monthly episode. I said, look, okay, the stills don't look great, but maybe when we see the performances, they really live up to it. Now, I will admit, when they first opened the door and we saw the actor playing George Martin, I did go, that's fantastic. I know instantly that that's George Martin. He looks like George Martin.
Yeah.
He acts like George Martin. I thought, this is great. And then they had that background where it was like the Yellow Submarine voices, like, "Ooh, how you going, John? I've got a hole in my pocket." And I just thought, oh no! And it didn't get much better from there. I guess the actors were kind of on a hiding to nothing, because they had to play the Beatles not being the Beatles. Like, they had to play like dour, unhappy Beatles. But look, the guy who played John Lennon was okay. When the guy playing Paul McCartney sat down opposite the Doctor and we saw him properly, I actually just laughed at how not like Paul at all he looked.
Well, with those bright blue eyes, that they almost seemed to be artificially lighting up, so that you could tell this guy had bright blue eyes. I don't think Paul has bright blue eyes. I think they're brown or hazel.
That's certainly how I remember it.
Yeah, I'm going to have to go and look at a close-up photo of him now to be sure, but even the eyes are wrong, and I'm thinking, this isn't Paul. No.
Yeah, and in terms of the plot, such as it was, when they kept going about, only a genius can do this, like, oh, you need to find a genius. You're not a genius. Only a genius can do that. I was like, we get it, guys. Lennon and McCartney are in the room. Yeah. They're geniuses. Yeah. We know where they're going. Come on.
Well, it was funny when John's standing there with the piano and he's looking at the musical notes. I'm thinking, at this point in time, I don't think the Beatles could read music. I think that's one of the famous stories about them, that they didn't read or write music. So Lennon's looking at these notes. I'm thinking, they wouldn't mean anything to him. I don't think he'd know how to play that.
Oh, okay, interesting. There you go.
Yeah. They got better as they went on. But early on, I don't think they could like write musical notation or anything. So when they would get in a string quartet or something like that, George Martin would be writing the notation.
That's true, yes.
They'd be sitting there going, it goes like papa, or whatever it goes like. And George Martin would write that down,
Yeah, they knew chords and then heard a play. Yeah, anyway, we don't want to dive too far down the Beatles. We look, I think we both get that this was never going to be as accurate as us as Beatle fans are going to want. And if we wanted to pick this whole thing apart just in Beatles terms, I mean, let's face it, we absolutely could. We get that they're just a sort of a... these are the Beatles in the way that Queen Nefertiti was in that terrible Matt Smith episode. Like, that's...
Yes.
We get that, okay? So,
Yeah.
Understood, point made.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned the storyline being sort of a bit sparse a moment ago, which I picked up on, which I had mentioned earlier as well. Why don't we talk about that? There wasn't really much to it. Just go to the past, notice music's missing, go to the future, future's stuffed, go back to the past, sort things out. The Beatles didn't have much of a role in it, and then it just sort of got padded out here and there with like Ruby playing her sad little number for her friend. And then at the end, literally tacking on a musical number that didn't need to be there. Was this light on?
This was incredibly light on. I mean, the entire plot basically was one scene. There was lots of atmospheric setup and a few good set pieces, and that's fine. Episodes do that. They went on for quite a while. Then we had the whole Pyramids of Mars visit to the future thing, and okay, that was a really good scene. And we'll come back to that in a moment, I suspect. They then had the exposition scene where the Doctor and Maestro explained the plot to each other. Maestro very helpfully explained how to defeat her, and then we had sort of 15 minutes of trying to find a chord.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's it. And when the guys over at Pull to Open come to do their quick 1 minute summary at the start of their episode, this will not be a challenge to them, I suspect. In fact, I think they will have some spare time left over.
Yeah. I made a page of notes. I do have a page of notes in front of me, but I did feel I didn't have a lot to sort of get my teeth into plot-wise, that's for sure.
No. And I suspect that that's deliberate. This is meant to be one of those ones where you either groove along with it or you don't, and the plot's kind of immaterial. And like, this is Russell T Davies. His plots have never been known to be that substantive.
And if that's a subtle guess, David, my word of the week, no, that's not what I mean by groove.
Oh, damn it.
I did like that this continued the Toymaker piece from the 60th and foreshadowed again the one who waits, who we still haven't come across. I like that they're getting a bit of an arc in there, even though our first two episodes have been on the lighter side. We are foreshadowing, I think, what's to come and what will probably be more substantial later in the season. Yeah,
I mean, they're absolutely clearly setting up a big bad either for the end of this season or sometime in the next. We obviously had the kid back at the end, the one that helped to bring Maestro into the universe. I think it could be dismissed that, given that this was just a ridiculous fantasy musical number at the end of the story, you could just go, this was just a fun way to put the kid in there and all the rest of it. But do you think that actually that was a sense of like, this kid has more of a role to play, or he's hinting at the big bad or something?
It could go either way. What if the kid is the big bad?
Yeah, absolutely. Buffy season one vibes there if it is.
Yeah, look, exactly. Or it could just be, as you say, there's just a wild and crazy end to the show, the end. You never see them again.
Yeah, given that, like, it was just a, very musical, like, everybody just burst into song and choreographed dancing in multiple locations. Like it's not meant to be remotely realistic.
No.
And again, like, I was just sitting there going, look, if I was watching Glee, fine. I'm not watching Glee, and I don't need Doctor Who to go full Glee. Again, that's a personal choice, but I didn't need it. But yes, given that it was so fantasy, it doesn't necessarily have to have been a real thing.
No, not at all.
Speaking of fantasies and not real things,
yes,
Rob, the main villain of the piece, your thoughts?
Oh, a villain like we've probably never seen before. I'm just trying to quickly cast my mind back in case someone writes in and says, no, in Big Finish number 273, there is a, it's like, oh, I wouldn't know, I've not heard it. But from what I can recall, there's been nothing like this in terms of look, style, attitude, their abilities with music. It was new. And, I think that's something Russell has tried to do in these past two episodes. Here's something you've never seen before on Doctor Who. Even though he is doing some things that we have seen very much before, and we touched on that in the previous hot take. Maybe I'll stop there and let you have a crack.
I liked the conception.
Right.
The idea that the Toymaker plays games and the Maestro plays music was an interesting conception. I'm going to just go out there and say it. The performance did not land for me at all. Again, there are going to be people who like that sort of campy, over-the-top zaniness, and they're going to love this performance. And again, good luck to you. That's a very, very reasonable thing. I'm not somebody who likes that real over-the-top type performances. I didn't like the early Missy performances. I don't like the more knowing River Song performances. I don't like Tenant when he goes, the full Tenant. And this felt like all of those things, and it's not something that landed for me. And particularly, for example, during that exposition scene where she just sort of started shouting and ranting and doing the "Whoa!" stuff, and that was they were moments when, honestly, I was just sort of like pulling the hoodie over the head and just falling down to the couch and just, no, I can't, no, I don't like this at all.
Well, let me ask you, did you like the counterpoint when he used the sonic screwdriver to create the silence, and you could see her with the mouth open, like trying to do the yodely kind of yell thing she was doing, and that wasn't working, and things were breaking on the ground, and you couldn't hear anything. When that silence came in, I thought that was a really effective scene.
Yeah, I was actually going to mention that. I think is a very, very strong scene. I did notice that they had to put a little bit of sort of background, almost white noise over it, so people weren't adjusting their televisions, thinking that the sound had dropped out. No, I thought that was one of the examples of the very good scenes that I mentioned at the start. So yeah, that was well. But look, no, this performance didn't work for me at all. I wanted Henry McGee's Music Master back, and that's a reference to the Goodies episode, The Music Master. I wanted his performance back, because even that wasn't quite as heightened and stagey and over the top as this one was.
Yeah, look, I think the performance does what it says on the box, and ticks what the director probably wanted, and why she was hired, and all of that. So in that sense, it's hard to fault in terms of it's doing what it's meant to do, but in terms of how it comes across, yes, I can see how it doesn't land. Absolutely.
That's just a stylistic thing. That's not my sense of humour. So be it.
Yeah. I think we mentioned this briefly a moment ago, but I do want to highlight it. The ruined London that we go to in the future looked really good. I mean, they didn't go exploring or anything, so they didn't have to really do much to sort of set it up in terms of the special effects. But it looked really good. And when the Doctor was like, okay, I'm going to take you to the future, and it's just leaning on the console, knowing what is going to be there, it seems, before Ruby even opens the door, I thought, we're into this darker sort of shooty that I started talking about back at the Christmas special. Like, I can sort of see this. I hope he plays up on this from time to time. And it was there. And I loved it in that scene. Yeah,
that was an excellent scene. I think it looked fantastic. I think the way it was played was really good. Yes, for long-term fans of the show, it's been done before.
Yeah.
But again, if you're somebody new coming in, that's a really good moment. And it does set up so perfectly this idea that just because they're going back to the past, it doesn't affect the future. And, I was born in the year 2000, so therefore the future's fine. Like, no, it doesn't work like that. The rules of the show are set up. So, yeah, it was really good. Shooty's performance there was really good. I think I did enjoy Shooty more in this one than I did in the last one. He's still not quite there, but he had more doctory moments this time, and I think that helped him.
Definitely.
That said, the moment when he went into a complete blind panic and was just sort of terrified, I don't think that's good for the Doctor ever. And I think the Doctor being terrified in the face of such a cartoonish villain doesn't help his credibility.
No, not at all. He was absolutely terrified. It would have been one thing if he was like, quick, come away. We're going to jump down this coal chute, and now I'm going to tell you we're in some deep trouble, but not be terrified of that deep trouble.
Yes.
I think that's a better way to play it. Even the scene where they were in that room with the projection on the looked like bed sheets. They were all sort of crumpled. There was a moment where the Maestro said something, and he sort of shuffled backwards, almost in a comedy, I'm terrified kind of way. And I was like, ooh, I didn't quite like that choice you've made there. But anyway, some other things we're getting more of, if he's being a bit more doctorish, is I think RTD throwing in some more RTD classic type stuff, which is, I'm thinking of specifically when we're introduced to all those people looking out their windows and hearing the music, and one of them's this nice old lady, and then she starts playing the piano. I thought, oh no, don't kill the old lady. Don't kill the old lady. They killed the old lady, Dave.
Was the old lady June Hudson?
Is she still alive?
Yeah, because she was in a DVD doco recently.
Oh, gosh, you know what? Maybe it was then. I wasn't thinking
maybe
of
it
her.
was, because I was sort of thinking, oh, wow, if that's June Hudson in 1963, we can go back and tell her not to design some of those Blake Seven costumes. But anyway.
And push back more on Tom's season 18 and Collins. And yes, you know.
Yeah, but like, look, if it wasn't, that was a nice little sidetrack that didn't matter. If it was, well, there you go. Rob, I just realised something in this episode.
Yes?
The sonic screwdriver looks nothing like the sonic screwdriver.
Are you only just realising that?
So yeah, last episode, when he put this big sort of fat beetle thing into the computer, I was like, oh, that's an interesting piece of tech. I wonder what that's for. And then when he brought it out this time, I'm like, oh, he's using that piece of tech again. And then I've gone, oh, that's right. His sonic screwdriver looks like a beetle now.
That's right. Which I've been paying attention to because they started flogging the toy of it 6 months ago. And that was actually people's first look at what it was like when they started selling the toy.
Yes. No, absolutely. So that came through. Look, we've talked about the Doctor twice now in the last couple of hours. We haven't spoken about Ruby Sunday much, if at all. And Rob, I'll just lead off here by saying I think she's okay. But if you asked me at this point to describe Ruby's personality or character, I think I would be struggling out of very generic Doctor Who terms. You know, she's a nice person. She's the companion. She's excited to explore history. And then you get to plot points like she's doesn't know who her parents are. She was abandoned. I haven't really got a sense of who this character is yet. And whilst I think Millie's giving a perfectly fine performance, unlike a lot of the better companions of the last 10 to 15 years, I don't think she's really brought a proper character into the writing. Because Doctor Who companions are generally written pretty generically, and the best ones, the actor or actress, bring something to it that elevates that. I haven't seen that yet from Millie.
Yeah, I'd chuck a Brave in on top of what you said. I'm thinking of the previous episode where like, we're going to go after this beast so it doesn't go after the baby, and she's like banging on the pipes like, you know, let's twat this sucker. You know, but broadly, I think you're right. It'll be interesting to see what gets teased out in the episodes ahead for sure.
Yeah, and given that we are, you know, resetting the show, resetting the Doctor, new Doctor, shooting out as a big personality, I get that Millie is maybe a second tier to that, and we'll probably get an episode that's really big for her. Knowing my luck, next episode and it'll all come good, but I don't think I've quite seen her yet. I will say though, I'm very pleased we're 2 episodes into an RTD season and no signs of sexual tension between the Doctor and companion, so tick from me.
Yeah, that is nice. And I'll say just on the next episode, it is the Moffat episode, Dave, so it probably will be quite good.
Okay, yeah, cool. Okay, that is good.
Yeah. Dave, a random thing on my sheet of paper here. Where the Doctor was trying to find the missing chord, and the Maestro saying, go on, just play it. And the Doctor's like, din, din, din. I thought, oh, he's not going to break into the theme music, is he? Because that just would have blown up this episode for me if that had happened. Thankfully, it didn't. Anyway, just a random thought.
Yeah, I had the same thought, particularly as we'd already had the Maestro leading into the theme the first time, which...
Yes.
It's really weird. I want to be intellectually consistent here, but I'm a human, so I can't be. When Capaldi did it, I thought that's really cool. When the Maestro did it, I thought that's really tedious. So that's probably just some personal, I don't know, whatever's coming through. Probably because I was like, okay, we're going full fantasy, are we? And you know, I'm one of those Doctor Who fans that loves the Mind Robber, but I needed the Land of Fiction to have a big computer with 1960s buttons at the end of it. Like, I'm that sort of person. I don't read and watch a lot of fantasy, as you know, Rob. You probably watch more than me. So that's just, my personal take. I'm more sci-fi than fantasy. My final note before we go to the sports desk is the mention of Totter's Lane was great. When he mentioned Shoreditch, I thought, oh, that's really cool. And then he went for the full, there's someone called Susan. She was my granddaughter. I can't explain it. I don't know if she's still alive or dead. And I did think, RTD, if that level of depth about Susan wasn't a prelude that you're dropping Caroline Ford on us at some point, that is very, very mean of you.
Yeah, true. And just in general with that scene, I loved it because on the podcast, and not just our podcast, but many podcasts, people will often refer to how there are 60s stories where Pat Troughton might be doing something here, and on the other side of town, we know the Hartnell Doctor is doing something else. But that's never been made explicit in the show. Like, Pat Troughton never sort of turned to the companion and said, oh, the younger me is over there doing something. Whereas here, we actually went for it and made it part of the show. And I thought that was cool because as fans, we've always acknowledged that sort of stuff has gone on in the Doctor's past.
Yeah, I think it is a good thing. It was a really nice moment. As you were saying that, I did sort of think of that whole Marvel thing, though. And we mentioned this at the end of the Christmas special as well, with a David Tennant Doctor just sort of living in domesticity in London, that once you've acknowledged that there are doctors all over the place doing other things, you then kind of have to start doing that Marvel thing of, oh yes, the Earth's been invaded, but unfortunately the Avengers are busy this movie, so we can't call on them for help.
Yeah, so the Tenant Doctor in the future obviously didn't save London. It got destroyed.
No. So yeah, look, it was a lovely nod, and like a lot of this episode, let's not think about it too hard.
Alrighty, let's go to the sports desk instead.
Rob, we are back at the sports desk for our play of the hour, our foul of the hour, and our player of the hour, given we're doing two of these back to back. Rob, kick us off, please, with your play of the episode.
It was hard to come up with one in some ways, but I think it's something I've mentioned, which is continuing the Toymaker storyline, the One Who Waits storyline, and just getting that in early into the season and letting people remember that that's a thing and that's coming up. And I think that was some good foreshadowing.
That's nice, Rob. I'm going to go for a really obvious one. I am going to go for that visit to the future. I thought it looked great. It was some of Shudi's best performances of the Doctor so far. It really brought home the threat for the first time in the episode, frankly. It brought home to a new audience what time travel's all about. So a big tick for me. That's the sort of Doctor Who I like.
All right.
I'll keep going with my foul of the week because it was the very next scene, so it is appropriate. And that was that exposition scene where I thought that was just some terrible writing. RTD is better than this. It started off well with the sort of, I'm the Doctor, I'm the Maestro, right, let's have this on. And then it just sort of devolved very quickly into explaining not just the plot to each other, but like the villain explaining how to defeat her to the Doctor, with some fairly dodgy sort of graphics and some pretty over-the-top performances. And I thought that was a pretty ordinary scene.
Fair enough.
Your foul, Rob.
My foul, again, something I've mentioned, this was just quite light on story. I think, you're going back to 1963, you've got the Beatles, you have the conceit that music's been taken from the world. This is really interesting as a backdrop to the story. But when you dissect what's there, there's just not that much there, and it's padded out with musical numbers. I think a missed opportunity here, Dave. Yeah,
I agree with that. Keep us going with your player of the episode, Rob.
My player, Dave, are the designers of this episode, aside from the costume designers. I think, as I mentioned earlier, the costume designers got this all wrong. They think 1967 happened in 1963. It didn't. But outside of that, the look of Abbey Road, again, aside from that control room, outside, up on the roof, looking over London, smoke coming from more buildings than you'd expect, because that's what happened back in those days. You can see St. Paul's. I never felt that I wasn't in 1963 in terms of the look of the world they were in, and I think that was designed beautifully, and I'm going to give it to them this week.
No, that's a really good call. I agree with all that. That's a really, really good call. My player of the week...
Yes?
I'm going with Beethoven for writing Moonlight Sonata, which is a lovely piece of music, and opened the episode very well.
Beautiful.
So, Rob, that's our hot take on The Devil's Chord. I'm just going to summarise my views by saying this episode wasn't for me. There was a lot here that I didn't enjoy. I must admit, as I was watching parts of it, I thought this is going to be an incredibly negative hot take from me, because I'm just going to hate the whole thing. Having the conversation with you, I have realised that there are enough good ideas, fun ideas, nice little moments for me not to outright hate this. But the bits I didn't like very, very strongly. It's too fantasy for me. It's too camp for me. It's too over the top for me. That's a reflection of my taste. Those things will land perfectly for others, but I can't give this more than a D+.
Alrighty, and how about your word of the week?
My word of the week was fortissimo, because sometimes there was a lot of loudness, but loudness doesn't always mean good.
Alrighty. For mine, I think this was a good step up from the previous episode, which I gave a 6 out of 10, so I'm giving this a 7 out of 10. It's by no means a classic. It's not even very, very good. It's very light on story. It's padded. I've discussed all of that already. But it is a 7 out of 10. It is a step up. And my word of the week, Dave, was groove. I just feel my needle hasn't dropped fully into the groove yet. With the Moffat episode coming up next, however, I think it might.
Yeah, I give them the opening 2 light, fluffy, safe, welcoming episodes. I fully understand that. I fully expected that. And you know, episode 1 was better than I expected. Episode 2 was not good. I do want episode 3, given this is only an 8-episode season.
Yeah, a quarter of it's over.
Yeah, I do want episode 3 to really put some meat on the bone next time, and I hope that's the case.
Me too.
Well, we'll talk about that in a week's time. Tomorrow we will have our list makers, top 5 space stories. But until then, I've been Dave.
And I've been Rob.
And we'll speak again soon.
Yes, we will. Goodbye.
Bye.